We're heading to the East Coast, making our way to Leetown, West Virginia, to check out how ARS scientists are using indoor recirculating systems to improve the health and yields of rainbow trout. We met with Dr. Beth Cleveland, research physiologist at ARS's National Center for Cool and Cold Water Aquaculture Lab. As you may expect, this is a much different system than the aquifer we talked about earlier, or the net pen method, where farm-raised fish are actually grown in large netted pens in natural waterways, such as oceans and rivers.
One of the challenges with growing them in open net pens is you do have this infinite amount of water, but then you're exposing the fish to so many more environmental pathogens, so that comes with its own set of challenges. And that's something that the recirculating system industry can really control because everything is inside, and so there really is no exposure to external water that hasn't been treated.
The lab where Dr. Cleveland conducts her research has tanks of all sizes and uses for each stage of a trout's life, from eggs to juveniles to adults. The variety of tanks enables Dr. Cleveland and her colleagues to conduct studies on fish at different sizes, from hatch to harvest, and they can also research how different water temperatures, flow, and feeds affect fish yield, size, and health, including stress.
We are about ready to start a study looking at how the disease-resistant fish respond to hypoxia stress. So low oxygen is one of the problems that the industry faces, especially when you're moving fish through a raceway and there are multiple levels of raceway. The lower levels tend to have lower levels of oxygen. Also, when fish are being produced in recirculation systems, oxygen has to be added to that water to maintain the optimal living conditions. And so our question is, do husbandry strategies need to change because we've selected for disease resistance or selected for fillet yield? So that's something that we're looking with a hypoxia stress challenge.
At the time of our visit here in Leetown, there were approximately 10,000 fish in different stages of life in this facility. But in the springtime, when eggs typically hatch, the facility can house over 100,000 eggs. The eggs are placed in hatching jars, where researchers can slow down or speed up development by controlling the water temperature. From there, they move into small but deep containers, where researchers can study traits of interest, such as fillet yield, disease resistance, and reproductive success, and investigate how genomic markers can be predictive for these traits. Once they reach a certain age and weight close to adulthood, they're placed in large pools and evaluated for size, weight, color, and growth rate. Currently, Dr. Cleveland's research is focusing on fillet yield.
We chose to select for fillet yield because it's a trait that the farmers are interested in. They want a high yield fish. The other benefit for us selecting for fillet yield is that we can use this population to develop selection markers. And the selection markers give us information about the DNA of the fish so that we can tell whether or not a fish will be good for breeding for fillet yield solely based on looking at its DNA. So then we can do individual-based selection rather than family-based selection.
One of the most interesting studies here is with the development of albino rainbow trout. This was a proof of concept project in order to see if they could use gene editing both as a research tool to understand the biology of the fish and to enhance its traits.
In this case, we focus on the genes that cause pigmentation because it's a very, very quick trait that we can identify upon hatch to determine whether or not the gene editing works. So as soon as these fish were hatched, we could say, yes, the gene editing worked. We can use this to target other traits or other genes that affect production traits.
The research here has resulted in a 2.7% increase in fillet yield over 3 generations. That's an impressive number when you're talking about a fish farm that produces 15 million pounds of fish each year. More yield means more revenue for the aquaculture industry, while at the same time maintaining the texture, color, and lipid content that consumers are looking for. Dr. Cleveland points out that rainbow trout provides just as much healthy fats as salmon, and steelhead, which is a variety of rainbow trout, has similar firmness, color, and taste compared to the highly popular Atlantic salmon.
The biggest challenge is getting consumers to recognize that trout are just as delicious as salmon. Trout are delicious to eat. They have a very high omega-3 content, so they are heart healthy. From a research standpoint, it's an excellent model for Atlantic salmon, which is one of the most popular food fish, but it can be more difficult to raise in-house. And trout and salmon are very highly related, so what we learn in trout can oftentimes relate to salmon. And so not only is it an excellent food fish, we can produce it very well in this country. It's fun to fish for, so we can stock the fish and use that as a recreational tool. And then it's also a model for other species.